Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Hello, listener. Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 96 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. So today I am going to talk about one of the few, or maybe even only, house rules that I've made for D&D that I call the plot twist mechanic. I wrote a blog post about this a while ago, but I wanted to talk about it on the podcast because you can really go deeper into something, I feel like, in a podcast than you can in a blog, because people will only read so many words before they've had enough. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what that is, the benefits of having a mechanic like this in the game, and if you're interested in having a mechanic like this in the game, how I'm doing it. But before I get to the main topic today, I want to give a thank you to the Sharkbone podcast and the Total Party Thrill podcast for your shout outs on recent episodes. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Big fans of both of those podcasts. And Christopher Ruthenbeck from Sharkbone was just on Game Master's Journey last week for episode 95. So definitely check that out if somehow you missed it. We talked about the social contract, which was another huge topic. But I think we did pretty well. I think we covered it pretty well. So one other thing before I get into the main topic, and I hope that you'll bear with me a little bit as I talk a little bit about my Patreon page. Now, I don't do this every episode. I don't have advertisements, or at least I haven't for quite a while. So I don't think it's too much to ask to occasionally in an episode take 5 or 10 minutes to tell you about what's going on my Patreon page, which is a big part of what keeps this show going. It takes time and money to produce these podcasts, time that I can't spend working a job or in other ways making money to pay the bills, right? So it's a labor of love, but at the same time, the more support I get from listeners like you, the more I can do and the more time I can justify sinking into this podcast. So just last week, I made some pretty major revisions to my Patreon page. I have made some additions to the patron rewards, and I have completely changed the milestone goals. And in case you don't know anything about Patreon, what it is it's a crowdsourcing platform. But instead of Kickstarter, where you fund a single project, this is more for content creators like podcasters and YouTubers who are producing content on an ongoing basis. So it's a way that you can say, I want to become a patron of Star Walker Studios, and you decide how much you want to donate on a monthly basis. And you can donate any amount you want. I mean, you can donate $1 if you want to. You can donate $100 if you want to. But I do have certain rewards at certain levels, and the rewards are just icing on the cake. They're little bonuses that are just kind of my way to say thank you. You can check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/StarWalkerStudios. Here are just some of the rewards that you can get and some of the new things that I've added. So I do a monthly podcast that I'm calling the Patron Cast, just for the patrons. So this is something that you will get access to in the Patreon feed for Star Walker Studios. So you can go listen to those episodes there or download them from there. And so once a month, I just do this show for the patrons. I talk about what's going on with Star Walker Studios, what's going on with the different podcasts, as well as just some things from my personal life and cool TV shows or movies I'm into right now, just stuff like that. But that show is constantly evolving, and I'm very open to feedback from the patrons as to what they like to hear on that show. So it may change in the future based on what patrons want. Now, something that I've just added that I'm going to be doing for the patrons is I'm going to start releasing some of the game content that I come up with. So I've been churning out quite a bit of content for, D&D 5th edition right now. I'm working on some adventures that I'm ultimately going to publish. I'm also working on my homebrew world of Primordia, which I've talked about in the world building episodes. So as I'm coming up with this stuff and I have things that are kind of in a finished form and are ready for outsiders to see, I will upload those for the patrons who will get access to these things. And it won't all be D&D stuff forever. It will just whatever I'm running, right? Like I'm sure there's going to be Numenera stuff in the future. But right now, it could be new monsters, magic items, PC races, sub races, spells, adventures, dungeons, all kinds of stuff. And as I start working in earnest on these adventures I want to publish, I will most likely be releasing those kind of bit by bit to the patrons through the patron rewards as well. Another reward that I've added is you can get on a short list to maybe play in one of my games. Now, there's no guarantees here. I can only run so many games, and I tend to give my current players, first dibs on a new game that I'm going to run. But there are often times that I need some more butts in the chairs, right? And so in the future, when I'm running a game online, whether it's a campaign or a one-shot, and I need players, I will go to this list of my patrons and offer it to those people first. So that's just some of the rewards that you can receive as a patron. And then Patreon also has milestone goals. And these are kind of like stretch goals in Kickstarter, which is where when the entire Patreon campaign gets to a certain level, you unlock these milestones. And so I've completely redone the milestones. I feel like the ones I had before weren't very inspired, and they were more my personal milestones and didn't really mean anything for you, the listener. So I've redone the milestones. So each milestone, there's going to be a tangible effect for not only the patrons, but all the listeners of, right now, Game Master's Journey. So my first milestone is when the Patreon reaches $200 a month, I am going to start doing live episodes of Game Master's Journey. Basically, all the episodes will be live. When I record this show, I will stream it to YouTube, and those videos will be available later on YouTube. So if you want to see the show live and see an unedited version of Game Master's Journey and also see my not so handsome mug on your screen, there you go. You'll be able to do that. And the other cool thing about this is there will be a chat room. So while you're watching me record live, you can be in the chat room talking to me and talking to the other listeners, or I guess in this case, watchers. So you can give me feedback in real time as I'm making the show. You can ask questions, and I can pull that into the actual show. And I think this will be super cool. It'll be a great way to further build the community that's formed around Game Master's Journey. And I'm really looking forward to doing it. And I think this is a very achievable goal that we can hit very soon, I think. The next milestone goal will be actual play episodes as part of Game Master's Journey. Now, I've done actual play on the show before. I did Obsidian Monolith. I did some Primordia episodes. So this will be most likely Curse of Strahd. It'll be whatever I'm running at the time that we hit this goal. I'm going to be streaming Curse of Strahd on YouTube, and that'll be available on YouTube. But when we hit this goal, what I'll do is take those videos, rip out the audio, and edit it and condense it into a podcast form and release that as part of Game Master's Journey. Now, I was planning to do that anyway, but the realities of life have forced me to get a part-time job, actually a couple of part-time jobs. So I've definitely gotten to a point where I really have to manage my time. And producing actual play episodes takes a lot of time. It takes a lot more time than producing these normal episodes. So I needed to set a milestone to where I can justify spending that much time for these actual play episodes. So I really hope we hit it. I really want to do this, but there are only so many hours in the week, and there's a lot less of that time now that I have for podcasting. So it's a milestone. So we hit this milestone, I'm going to do it. And all of these are like, you know, as long as we're at that level, I'm going to do that thing. So as long as we're beyond the $200 a month, I'm going to do Game Master's Journey Live. If the Patreon ever falls below that, then, you know, probably won't until we hit that level again. And the same thing with the actual play episode. So if we stay at that level and I finish the Curse of Strahd campaign, then I'll do actual play of whatever the next thing I run is. The next milestone is 2 Game Master's Journey episodes every week. And I already have plans for the second episode. It won't be just another episode like the regular episodes. It will be a slightly different format and slightly different topics. And then some of the other milestones is another podcast about geeky TV and movies. This is something I've been kind of wanting to do for a while, which would be a weekly show where I talk about the movies and TVs that I'm into that I think you might enjoy. And then finally, another milestone I've got is another podcast. I've actually had this on the back burner for going on a couple years now, which I'm calling Lex Out Loud Conversations with Interesting People. And this will be a show of interviews with interesting people that I think are interesting, that I think you will think are interesting. These could be game designers or developers, writers, television producers, scientists. Sky's the limit. Anybody who is an interesting person, has interesting things to say about some topic or subject area that we all will find interesting, I will interview for the show. So that's what's going on with the Patreon. Again, go check it out, patreon.com/StarwalkerStudios, or just click the Patreon button at the top of the show notes and look into becoming a patron. I really would appreciate it. And while I'm talking about the patrons, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to my brand new patron, Casey Lipson. Thank you, Casey. Welcome aboard the Obsidian Monolith, the patron suite, patron class, which is better than first class. You get to sit up with the pilot in the cockpit. I don't know. Maybe you wouldn't want to do that. But welcome, Casey, to the esteemed ranks of the patrons. And I also want to thank Mr. Steve Strickland, who is my Tier 5 patron. And so those are some other patron rewards. You get to have me thank you on the show. So let's give it up for Casey and Steve. Woo! Yeah. Thank you. You guys rock. Yes. All right. Enough about the Patreon. Let's move on to the real subject of this episode, my plot twist mechanic for D&D. So one of the really great things about having so many RPGs to choose from these days is that you can take elements that you really like from one RPG and use them in another. And I think this is something that a lot of experienced GMs do, something that I do. So this is a mechanic that I have created for 5th edition D&D. It is very much inspired by the GM Intrusion from Numenera, and there are similar mechanics in many other games, including using fate points in Fate and Destiny in Star Wars, just to name a couple others. So this isn't a new idea. It wasn't new when Numenera came out. It's not new now, but that is the inspiration for this. And I wanted to take what I liked about the GM Intrusion, which overall I really like the mechanic, and you can learn a lot more about the GM Intrusion by checking out my GM Intrusions podcast. But I wanted to take what I liked from that and apply it to D&D. So even if you're not playing or running D&D, this could still be very useful to you if you, like me, see the merits and the many uses of a mechanic like this. And if your game doesn't already have a mechanic like this, you can do what I'm doing and house rule it into your game of choice. Probably won't be too hard to do. It wasn't hard at all to do with D&D. It was almost there already. So what is a plot twist? As I said, it's similar to a GM intrusion in Numenera, or using fate points in Fate, or Destiny in Star Wars. Common elements with all those. These are all kind of the same thing coming from slightly different angles in different games. So what the plot twist is it's a way for the dungeon master or the game master to suggest a complication or a plot twist to a player. Now, the player has the option to either accept this complication that the GM is proposing, or they can refuse it. If the player accepts the plot twist, she gets a reward. If the player refuses the plot twist, there's a cost to that the player has to pay. So the main benefit of this in a nutshell is you tend to see a lot more player buy-in to this wrinkle or plot twist or complication that you want to interject into the story than you would if you just did it, either by just hand waving it or playing, quote, by the rules and getting it to happen or whatever. You may or may not have problems or encounter player resistance to this complication you want to interject if there's not some kind of system like this plot twist around it. So let me illustrate this with an example. This is a classic example. At least for me, it's classic because I'm pretty sure I use this example at least a few times in GM Intrusions to help illustrate why this kind of mechanic is really useful. So imagine you're running D&D or a game like it, and for the sake of the story that you're wanting to tell, you want the player characters to be captured. Now, an easy way to do this is if it's the beginning of the campaign, you can just begin the campaign with, you guys are all captured, here's what's happening. But what if you're in the middle of your campaign and you come up with this great story idea, but for it to work, you need the PCs to be captured? This can be really difficult to do in D&D or in any game that doesn't have some kind of mechanic like this to help you out. And the reason is because in D&D, player characters have a lot of resources and abilities that they can draw on to try to avoid something happening that they don't want to happen. Now, it could be that you have just a really awesome group of players and there's a lot of trust between all the players and the GM, and you can, as a DM, just say, hey, you guys are going to be captured, and the players will be okay with that. And if you're lucky enough to be in a group like that, then that's awesome. And maybe this mechanic won't be as useful to you as to the rest of us, but I think it still will be useful. So hang in there with me. But a lot of us aren't in that situation. You may just have one player at the table that's not on board, or it could be all of them. So if you're wanting to do this, you want the players to get captured. All it takes is one player to not like that idea and say, hey, we should get some kind of roll, right? Like, you can't just say, these orcs capture us. Like, we should get some rolls to try to keep that from happening, right? And by the rules, they should, right? And sure, you can, go old school on them and be like, I'm the dungeon master and what I say happens, shut up and like it. But they may not like it. They probably won't, right? If you have a player that says, hey, I should get a roll to avoid this, and you're like, no, this just happens because I'm the DM, that player's probably not going to be very happy about that. There's going to be some negative feelings going on at that moment. So this mechanic is a way that you can avoid that, and you can still do the cool thing that you want to do after the PCs are captured. So this problem of the PCs being able to avoid this thing that you want to do, and again, being captured is just one example. the problem becomes even bigger the higher level they get. You know, it's one thing to maneuver a group of second level characters to get captured. It's a whole nother thing to try to maneuver a group of 10th level characters or 15th level characters to get captured. So I can imagine people disagreeing with me and saying, oh, you know, it wouldn't be that hard to capture players by the rules or player characters. It's like, well, maybe not at second level, but try to do it at 15th level, you know, when they have contingencies and teleports and all that good stuff. And again, doing this, because this is the thing. I'm a dungeon master, I'm a game master, and I want to capture the PCs. Why? Not because I just want to fuck with them or show them how I have all the power, or at least not if I'm a good dungeon master, but it's because I have a story, and this story involves them being captured, and there's things coming after that. And it's not a thing of I'm trying to have the players have a bad day and not have fun in my game. I have plans. There are reasons. And if the players will just go along with it, it'll probably be fun and they'll like it. But how can I convince them of that without having to tell them what the reasons are and spoil all the surprise? And again, it only takes one player to not, you know, be on board with this. And now we've got to resolve it with dice. And then even if you've stacked the deck in your favor, it could go sideways, and instead of them getting captured, you end up killing them or whatever. Or they just, you can't capture them and you keep bringing in more monsters, and you know, and then you get to the point where you have to cheat behind the screen to get them captured, and it's just this big mess, and you can avoid all of it with the plot twist. So why would you want to use a mechanic like this? How is something like the plot twist going to be helpful in your game? Well, first of all, it's a way to make a scene more interesting. If you have a scene that's playing out and it's just, you know, nothing really interesting is happening, maybe the player characters are rolling really well and the enemy is rolling really badly, or vice versa, or it's just a ho-hum encounter or whatever, and it, you know, it doesn't have to be combat. It could be anything, maybe a social interaction. It's just like everything's just being too predictable. You know, this can be a way that you can really kind of turn things upside down if you want to. It's also a great way to increase the danger or the dramatic tension in a scene when a challenge is being overcome too easily. And I think this is a much better way to handle it than just adding more hit points to your monsters behind the screen, right? Like everybody knows about this, right? Like the DM who has, you know, you encounter his big bad, or even worse, it's not a big bad, it's just some random monster. And, you know, the players roll really well, maybe they get some crits, and the DM's monster is going to go down in a round or two, and the DM's like, man, you know, I wanted this to be this epic confrontation, and I don't want my monster to fall this quickly, even though the players have fairly won. And so they just add hit points to the monsters, right, behind the screen without the players knowing. And I've seen so many GMs recommend this to GMs, like, oh, if the combats don't go in too quickly, just add more hit points. They'll never know. And it's like, well, first of all, they will know. They may not know that one given time, but if this is your MO, if this is what you do, they're going to figure it out. And once they do, you are going to lose so much credibility and trust as a GM. You may not be able to ever repair that. You may not be able to get that back once you've lost it. And it's just kind of cheap. It's like, first of all, I feel like you should just give the players the W, right? Just give them the win. But if it's really important to you that this be an epic encounter and not be easily overcome, then, you know, there's a better way to handle it than just adding hit points out of nowhere to your monster. And that way is the plot twist. Another great use of the plot twist is to add humor to a scene and or to release dramatic tension. And this is a great way to use it in social interactions. Now, players usually don't like their characters to look foolish or make any mistakes, right? Unless you're doing like a comedy. And with some players, the plot twist may be the only quote fair way for you to have an NPC kind of pull one over on them. You know, you've got players that always want to roll perception, or they always want to roll insight to know if the NPC's lying. And if they have a really good score, you know, no NPC could ever lie to them because they've got this crazy insight bonus or whatever, right? So the plot twist can be a way to sidestep that and say, you know, here's my plot twist that for whatever reason, your character actually buys this cockamamie story this NPC is selling you. Even though you and I both know you have this huge insight bonus, and if we rolled it, you'd probably, you know, see through it, right? But for the sake of the story, I think this would be cool if your player falls for it, at least for now. What do you say? And that's what the plot twist is it's taking something where in the old days would just be heavy-handed GM hand-waving or railroading or cheating, and instead it's turning it into a negotiation with the player where you as the GM are saying, hey, I have this cool idea of a way to add a twist to the story, to add a complication, to make things more difficult for your character. But it's not, you know, just to make things more difficult. It's going to make things more interesting and more fun for everybody. What do you say? And the player has the chance to say, yeah, I'm cool with that. Let's go with it. And if they do, they get a little perk. Or the player can say, you know, I'm really not comfortable with that. I don't want to do that. But then they have to give something up. So another use of the plot twist is to try to direct the players or the plot in a particular direction. You know, whether that's so that, you know, they go the place that you planned for the adventure or whatever. Or maybe, you know, you want them to interact with a certain NPC and they're just going to ignore this NPC. I mean, there's so many uses for it. I could spend an hour just coming up with examples of ways and how you could use the plot twist. And this is a way to do this without the players feeling like you're railroading them when you're trying to direct the plot or get them to go to a certain place. Because again, you know, they get a reward for going along with it, and they have the option to refuse it. The plot twist can also be a way to give the PCs a reward for something that maybe you were going to do anyway, but you feel like they really deserve a reward or they really need one. Maybe they're in the middle of a very dangerous combat encounter and there's bad rolls and things are really going south for the PCs. And you think, you know, if I could give them this reward, it might help them out. And instead of just giving it to them for no reason or coming up with some lame reason, you can say, hey, I'm going to introduce this complication, make the complication interesting, but not necessarily have a huge negative impact. But then that's a way that you can give them that reward and have it feel like they earned it instead of you're just handing rewards out because you made the encounter too hard or because they're rolling shitty, which kind of breaks the fourth wall, breaks immersion, and just turns it all into a game instead of a story again. Also, this mechanic encourages cooperative storytelling between the GM and the players, and it lessens the sense of the GM as the adversary of the players. And this mechanic can be very helpful if you have a player or players or the whole group of players where there's a lack of trust for the GM. You know, if you have one of those players that are, you know, preaching the player agency Bible at you all the time, and anytime you do something that just, you know, smells faintly of railroading or taking choice from the players, like this player is all up in arms, right? Like we've probably all encountered these players. You know, if you want to keep this person at your table for some reason, this is a way that maybe you can without constantly having conflict or not being able to do the fun things you want to do because of this wet blanket player that you've got. All right, so now I've kind of talked about why you might want the plot twist and how, you know, the different ways that you can use it. So now let's get into the actual nitty gritty how this works, okay? So again, this is very much inspired by the GM Intrusion from Numenera. And as I said, there are similar mechanics in many other games, but Numenera is the one that I have the most experience with. I have a lot of experience with the GM Intrusion, and for the most part, I like the way the GM Intrusion is handled in Numenera. Now, it's not perfect in my mind, so I'm going to take advantage of converting this to a new system to make it perfect, or at least my version of perfect. So one flaw that I see with the GM Intrusion as it is in Numenera is that it's directly tied to XP and character advancement. So in Numenera, in addition to using XP to level up your character, it's also a resource that you spend during the game, kind of like fate points. Okay, so that's a whole nother can of worms, the issues you get into with having those two things, which is a topic for another day. But one of the problems with the GM Intrusion is it's one of the major ways that PCs are supposed to get XP in the game. So they get like story XP, which is like what you would get in D&D for achieving a milestone in the story or something like that. So they get XP for that, but you're also supposed to be giving them GM Intrusions all the time, and they're getting XP for that as well. And the problem with this is it can lead to GMs feeling like they're cheating their player characters if they're not doing enough GM Intrusions in a session. Because it's like, the system recommends doing, one GM Intrusion per player per session. Okay. So as a GM, you kind of can feel like you have to do that. And if you don't do that, then either you need to just give them more XP at the end, or they're not getting as much XP as they quote should. Right. And yeah, you can say, well, you could just not do it that way or not worry about it. But I've heard so many GMs of Numenera talk about this, about, I feel really bad because the last session I only did one GM Intrusion, or I didn't do any GM Intrusions. And you have this quota, right? Like, I've got 4 players. I need to do 4 GM Intrusions tonight. And so instead of doing an intrusion or a plot twist when a really cool one comes to you, or when it's really dramatically appropriate, or it's just the perfect time to do one, right? Instead, you're looking for every opportunity, and you end up doing a lot of them that are kind of lame, just because it's like, well, during this 4-hour session, there was one really cool opportunity for a plot twist or a GM Intrusion, but that's only one, and I need to give out 4 because each player character needs to get one. So I had to come up with 3 others that were kind of not so inspired and kind of lame or whatever, right? So I see that as a real problem. And, that's something that, not right away, but after I ran Numenera a lot, it started to be kind of a bit of a drag running the game, is like feeling like I always had to do GM Intrusions. So one thing I wanted to accomplish with my plot twist mechanic is I wanted it to be something that the DM can do when she's inspired to do it, or when it's a great time or a great idea comes to her, but to not feel like she has to do it every session or has to do it so many times every session. If a session goes by and there's no plot twist, no big deal. It's kind of icing again, right? It's optional icing on that cake. So in order to do this, I did not want the plot twist to be at all tied to XP or character advancement, because my first thought I actually started thinking of how to do this when I first got 5th edition, like over a year ago now. And my first idea was like, well, let's just convert it to XP. I mean, that'd be pretty easy to do. In Numenera, it basically takes 16 XP to go up a level. Okay. And when you receive a GM Intrusion, you get 1 XP. So in a way, you could think about it, you're getting a 16th the amount of XP you need to level. So I could go and take the XP chart for D&D and divide, the amount of XP you need for a level by 16 and do it that way. Well, one problem is you get, really awkward numbers. Like, it's not like Numenera where every level you get the same amount of XP or need the same amount to level, right? D&D, it scales upwards as you go up in level, how much XP you need. So it wouldn't be very elegant. You'd have to have a chart that you and the players would constantly have to refer to. And it's tied to advancement. So you could start to get in this situation where you feel like, if I didn't do any plot twists last week, it was a missed opportunity, or I kind of gypped the players, or now I need to give them extra XP or whatever. And also, we've talked about on the show before the massive problems with the XP by encounter system in 5th edition, and how it's pretty much broken and you don't want to use it. Or if you do use it, you need to modify it. So if you're using like the hand wave method or even milestone XP, it can get a little sticky, with these plot twists that are giving them XP, right? It just gets complicated. So for those reasons, I didn't want it to be involved with XP at all. Well, luckily, 5th edition has a really easy way to do this, and you probably already know where I'm going with this, and that's the inspiration mechanic. Already, we have in the game system a way that you can reward players that is not tied to XP, is not tied to character advancement, is as useful at 1st level as it is at 20th level, and it's easy, it's simple. So in 5th edition, inspiration, if you don't know, is you just get advantage on a roll. So I give you inspiration, and you can at any time use that inspiration when you're about to make a roll, and you roll that with advantage, which means you get to roll 2 20-sided dice and choose the higher one as your result. So that's how inspiration works. So I'm going to use inspiration in my plot twist mechanic. However, in order to really make it work the way I want, I need to make some slight modifications to how inspiration works and how I use it as a DM. So the first little change that I'm making to inspiration, and this is how I've been doing inspiration since the very beginning, pretty much, is I allow inspiration use to be declared after a roll is made, but before the results are announced. So by the rules in D&D, you have to say, I'm using inspiration on this roll before you actually roll. And the problem with that is, let's say I'm going to use inspiration on an attack roll to hit a monster, right? So I tell the DM, I'm going to use my inspiration. I roll my 2 20-sideds, and let's say I use 2 different colors of 20-sided. So I know which is my regular D20 and I know which is the inspiration D20, right? And I roll a 20 on that regular D20. I just basically wasted the inspiration, because if I wouldn't have used inspiration, I would have rolled a 20. So I didn't need inspiration, but I just used it. And the other thing is by the rules, you either have inspiration or you don't. So it's like, once you use that inspiration, it's gone, right? And it was just, you just totally wasted it. So that's a feel bad moment that I don't like to have at my table. I want inspiration to actually feel like it's meaningful. Even if you roll those 2 D20s and you roll a 6 and an 8 and neither one succeeds, you still feel like you had, well, I gave it a go, it didn't work, right? It was still a good use of that resource. But when you roll and the original die is a 20, you just wasted that resource, right? So basically the way I do it is, you get to make the roll, you get to see what your number is, but before I tell you if you hit or not, or whatever, if you're trying to schmooze someone before I tell you if it succeeds or not, you can say, you know what? I think I can do better than that. I'm going to use my inspiration and roll that second D20. The other nice thing about this is it effectively, instead of inspiration being rolling with advantage, you could also see it in this method as you're just re-rolling, which is a mechanic in Numenera where you can spend an XP to re-roll. So, by letting the players choose to use inspiration after the roll is made, you could either look at it as they're rolling with advantage and they just didn't roll the 2 dice at the same time, or you could look at it as they're getting to re-roll that original roll. I mean, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, right? So that's my first modification. My second modification is, for this to really work, I want players to be able to have more than one inspiration. It needs to be something that they can have multiple inspiration, as opposed to just you have it or you don't. but I want there to be a limit. I don't want players just hoarding inspiration, and now this player's got 10 inspiration and can just use it over and over, right? So I wanted there to be a limit to how many they could have, and I wanted this limit to increase as they get higher level. Because, as you get higher level, you're facing bigger and bigger challenges, and you tend to face more challenges in a given level than you did before. So I wanted that resource to be a bigger pool as you go up in level. So there's a really I tried all different kinds of ways to do this, but there's a really simple way, which is just to use the proficiency bonus. So what I do is I say you have inspiration points, and you can have a number of inspiration points equal to your proficiency bonus. So that means a first level character can have up to 2 inspiration points. Now you gain inspiration the same way that you do by the rules. And again, that's kind of up to you as a DM to decide when and why and how you award inspiration. But now, you can award them up to 2 before they're at the point where they can't get any more, right? And not only does this encourage them not to hoard it, it also encourages them to use it more often, right? Because it's like, well, once you're at your max, if you do something cool that would give you inspiration, it doesn't help you anymore. Also, because of the way that I do inspiration and I allow it to be used after the roll is made, I also allow you to spend as many of your inspiration points as you want on a given roll. So this ends up working exactly like spending XP for rerolls in Numenera. So let's say you're a first level character, you've got 2 inspiration, you roll to hit the giant, you roll an 8, it's not good enough, or well, you assume it's not good enough. So you say, I'm gonna spend an inspiration point and re-roll that, or roll another D20, however you wanna look at it. You roll again, you roll a 10. You think, well, that's better, but I still don't think it's good enough. So you say, you know what, I'm gonna spend another inspiration to re-roll again, or roll another D20. And you can do that as many times as you have inspiration to spend. So again, as you get higher level and your inspiration pool gets bigger, you can do that more and really focus on one roll and succeed, hopefully. You can also spend your inspiration to aid another player's roll. Now again, you have to do this before the results are announced, but let's say I'm trying to hit this giant, I roll an 8, miss, spend an inspiration, roll a 10, miss, I'm out of inspiration. Well, my buddy on the other side of the table can say, hey man, I'm gonna spend one of my inspiration and let you try that again. You get to roll again. So that's it. That's pretty much my modifications to inspiration to make this work. So you can declare inspiration after the roll, but before results are determined. You have a potential pool of inspiration equal to your proficiency bonus. Now you don't just freely get, you have to earn inspiration still. You don't just automatically get that, but you can have more inspiration than just one. And you can spend as many inspiration points as you have on a single roll, and other players can spend inspiration to help you on your roll. So I am thinking about maybe allowing inspiration to be used to re-roll any roll in the game, just like in Numenera. I haven't decided about this, so I'd love your feedback. GameMastersJourney@gmail.com, what you think about this idea. So this means you could spend an inspiration to re-roll damage. So maybe you throw that big fireball and you roll really crappy on damage, all 1s and 2s, and before the DMs tells you the result of the damage, you can say, hey, I'm going to spend inspiration and re-roll the damage. Now you have to re-roll all of it. You don't get to just pick some of those D6s. So that's a possibility. So I don't know. I think because your amount of inspiration is still fairly limited, I don't think it would be too broken to allow that. But I don't know. And then you could be in a situation where, let's say you have 2 inspiration, you could spend 1 inspiration on your attack roll to make sure you hit, and then spend another inspiration on the damage roll to make sure you do a lot of damage. I don't know. What do you think? Is that too much? Now, I do some other things with inspiration, again, to make it more kind of like a fate point. So some of the other things I let people do with inspiration is you can spend an inspiration point to, say, declare you have a piece of mundane, non-magical equipment that isn't on your character sheet, right? So you get to a situation and you really need a shovel, or you really need a fishing hook or whatever, and you don't have one. You didn't buy one, you don't have it on your character sheet. You can spend an inspiration point and say, oh, I did buy a shovel last time we were in town, and here it is. And as long as, the GM has to okay it, but for me personally, as long as it's not like something that kind of breaks that fourth wall or breaks immersion, because it's like, you didn't have a pack horse all this time. Like it's one thing to say you had a foldable shovel in your pack that no one knew about. It's another thing to say all this time there's been a pack horse that no one knew about. But that's up to GM discretion, right? You can also use an inspiration point to declare a story element up to DM approval. And this is not like when the DM just asks, oh, well, what is in the room? You tell me. This is when, you want to say that there's a chandelier I can swing from, and there isn't one. You ask the DM, is there a chandelier? And DM's like, no, sorry, no chandeliers. You can be like, well, can I spend an inspiration point and there's a chandelier? So there you go. That's another possibility. Another thing I allow inspiration to be used for is to turn a death save failure into a success. So this is a way to keep PCs around. So if you have a PC making death saves and they fail one, they can spend an inspiration and they succeeded instead. And also, just like by the rules, you can use inspiration to cancel disadvantage on a roll. So if you're doing something and you have disadvantage for some reason, like trying to be sneaky in a suit of plate armor, you can use inspiration to cancel that disadvantage. So the plot twist is going to work very similar to the GM intrusion in Numenera. I will propose a complication to the story that will impact your character. You can then either accept or refuse that plot twist. If you accept the plot twist, you get 2 inspiration points. You get to keep one, and you get to give the other one away to another player. And you have to give me a reason. Now, the reason can be kind of anything as long as it's not lame. It can be in character or out of character. It could be, I'm giving Joe the orc an inspiration point because he remembered to bring a shovel that we really needed, which would be an in-character reason. Or it could be, I give Bill, Joe's player, a inspiration point because he brought us all pizza tonight, right? It can be any reason, but there should be a reason, just because that's fun. So if you accept the plot twist, you get 2 inspiration points, you keep one, you give the other one away to another player. If you refuse the plot twist, then you have to spend 1 inspiration to refuse it. So this means if you don't have any inspiration, you can't refuse the plot twist, right? So if you want to have that option, then you got to only save an inspiration back just in case the GM springs a plot twist on you. All right, so we've talked about kind of in general terms what the plot twist is, how I think it can benefit your game, why you might want to use it, and then I outline basically how it works. And again, I will have this all in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com if you want to go through it. So now let's talk about kind of more high level stuff, how you can kind of master the plot twist and how you can really make it work for you. So first off, just a general guideline, you should usually target a plot twist at a single player character. If you're in a situation where you have a plot twist and you're not sure which player character it should target because it kind of seems to affect the whole group, ask yourself if one of the PCs is going to be more affected by this than the other. So maybe your plot twist is there's going to be an explosion that's going to involve a reflex save to take less damage from, right? Pretty standard. And you're like, well, the explosion's going to impact everybody. So who gets the plot twist? Well, maybe in that case, it would be the person with the lowest dex save, right? Maybe it'd be that orc barbarian who has like no dexterity. He's like got a minus on dexterity, right? So he would be a good one to offer the plot twist to because he's the one that's going to suffer from it the most. However, if you are in a situation where all the PCs are affected equally and you can't find one that's a little bit more impacted than everyone else, you can do a group plot twist. And it works the same way, except you're offering this to the group as a whole. So everyone needs to accept it, or everyone needs to refuse it unanimously. You can't have 2 players say, I'll accept it, and 2 players say they refuse it, because the explosion's going to happen, right? It's going to hit everybody. So it's all in or all out kind of thing. If everybody refuses it, then each player has to pay an inspiration point. If everyone accepts it, then each player gets an inspiration point, but they don't each get another point to give away because everybody already got a point. Now, one thing that you could do as a GM is, let's say you have one player character who doesn't have any inspiration, but you've got another player character that has 2 inspiration. You could let the player with 2 inspiration also spend the 1 inspiration for the player that doesn't have any if they want to refuse the group plot twist. Like, I'd let that fly. It's like, you guys as a group owe me 4 inspiration to refuse this. You know, you don't necessarily each one have to pay 1 if maybe someone's got some extra inspiration. But I would probably decide that on a case-by-case basis. I would let them do it in a situation where there's a PC that doesn't have any inspiration, but I wouldn't let them do it just because one PC has a bunch that they want to get rid of. You know, don't let them abuse it, basically. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do plot twists as a DM. You can just come up with them on the fly during the game, and this is really my preferred method, and the beauty of not having a quota of plot twists per session that you need to do is you can totally do it this way. So you just run the game like you normally would, and if a moment comes up where you're like, man, I really wish that this thing could happen, but I don't think the PCs will let it happen, you can propose it as a plot twist. Or if you have an idea of a way to kind of turn up the pucker factor on an encounter, or increase the danger level of an encounter that's being too easy, like maybe reinforcements come, or suddenly the room catches on fire, or the floor starts crumbling beneath their feet, or something like that. You can use a plot twist for that. So just, you know, when inspiration strikes, you can do it. Another way is if you find that inspiration doesn't strike very often, or you're not giving out as many of these as you'd like, is you can come up with ideas ahead of time. And you can come up with ideas based around characters or monsters or encounters. So maybe you might come up with a plot twist that's really good for a given character. Maybe it pulls in their background or something that's happened during play. Maybe they had a disagreement with an NPC in an earlier session. So as a plot twist, you know, the NPC takes some kind of revenge on them or something. Or you could come up with a plot twist ahead of time that's based on a certain monster. You know, at a dramatically appropriate moment in the combat, the Illithid is going to do this crazy thing. And it could be something that's on his character sheet, or it could be a new mechanic that you make up that this particular Illithid could do, like a legendary action, basically. Or, you know, instead of having a plot twist tied to a given monster, it could be tied to a given encounter. And, you know, encounter doesn't have to mean combat. So maybe the PCs are crossing a ravine on a very rickety rope bridge, and you could have a plot twist that you've come up ahead of time where the bridge starts to fall apart. Something like that. So again, none of these things are things that you can't do without a plot twist mechanic, but they're things that if you did do it without this mechanic, you could get some resistance from the players, and it may not happen because they'd be like, well, I should get to roll, you know, to see that I noticed that the bridge was going to fail before we went on it, or something like that could lead to your plot twist not even happening, or your plot twist could happen, but now you've got disgruntled players because they don't like it that you did that. So this just avoids that, because they get a chance to say yay or nay, and if they accept it, they get a reward. They get inspiration, which they can then use to help mitigate any fallback from your plot twist. So let's say the explosion example. There's an explosion as my plot twist. The players accept it. they get inspiration, and now if they fail that dex save to take half damage from the explosion, they can use that inspiration to re-roll that dex save. If you don't want to just come up with them all on the fly, you can come up with them ahead of time. You could generate lists or tables of just plot twists that could happen anytime and just pick from that list or roll on it. There's so many ways you can do this. Now my best advice is, to change it up as much as you can. Don't keep going back to the same well. Don't do the same plot twists all the time or even multiple times. If you have a plot twist that's an explosion, don't use that one again. Come up with something different next time. And also, I would definitely recommend that you spread the love. You can either kind of do this mentally or actually have a list of the player characters and keep track of when you give different plot twists to different player characters. Just because it's not so much about the inspiration, because again, every time a player character accepts a plot twist, they get to give an inspiration away. And, my experience with this with Numenera is a lot of times players would tend to give those points to players that didn't have any, right? So a lot of times it'd be like, oh, well, because in Numenera you get XP, it'd be like, well, who has the least amount of XP? I'll give my XP to that system, which is totally valid, right? To that person. So this same thing. Who doesn't have inspiration? Oh, Jill doesn't have inspiration. I'll give my inspiration to Jill. So the players will tend to mitigate this themselves. So you don't have to really worry about it from a mechanic point of view of, this person's not getting inspiration. But a plot twist is a way to put the spotlight on a player character, because in that moment, they're at the center of the story because something is happening involving their character. So that's really the reason that you want to spread the love and try to give each player overall in the course of the campaign a relatively equal number of plot twists. And again, you don't have to agonize over this, and keep a tally, but just, make sure that there's not a player that you're giving them to all the time compared to everyone else, or there's not a player that you rarely give them to. Try to make it as equal as you can so that everybody gets their moment in the spotlight. So a question that's often asked about GM Intrusions, and I'm sure we're going to have a similar question with plot twists, is when is a plot twist a plot twist, right? Like the rope bridge failing. This is something now obvious. Okay. So let's use the rope bridge as an example. PCs are crossing a rope bridge and it starts to fail. Is that a plot twist that they get inspiration for, or is that just something that happens? Well, honestly, it's up to you. The plot twist is just a way to have the things that you want to happen in the story as a GM to improve the story. Again, this is to improve the story, not just to fuck with people. It's a way to have those things happen without the players resisting it and without the players being resentful of it, and to keep everybody happy and have it be a cooperative experience. So, one guideline I use for is a plot twist or not is it is when I want it to be. When I want it to be something the players can refuse and something that I'm going to reward them for accepting, then it's a plot twist. If it's something that I don't want, like the bridge is just going to break regardless, and I don't want them to have the option to refuse it, then I just do it. It's not a plot twist. So that's one way to look at it. Another way to determine if a plot twist is a plot twist with capital P and T is whether you planned it or not. So if I planned the rope bridge to fall when I was designing the adventure, then maybe it's a plot twist, maybe it's not. But if it's something I come up with on the fly during play, like I didn't plan it ahead of time, but they start crossing the bridge and I think, oh, wouldn't it be funny if the bridge started to fall? Well, that's a plot twist, right? Because I just came up with it. I didn't plan it. And then another guideline, I think I've kind of already covered this, is you can use a plot twist when it involves something that you want to happen to better the story, but it's something that the PCs could resist and maybe would resist, right? So like the being captured. Okay, I want the PCs to get captured for the good of the story, to lead into the next part of the story. But I think, well, obviously that's something they could resist unless I really overpower them. It's something that they have the potential to resist. And if I think there's a good chance that my players will resist it, or at least some of them will, then time for a plot twist. So I have an example of something that happened in a game I was running a long time ago that I wish I would have had something like this back then, or would have thought to have something like this back then. So way back when I was running Changeling to Dreaming, and the player characters were fighting my nemesis. So I had set up a nemesis for the campaign. They'd encountered this NPC numerous times. They hated his guts. I did such a great job at making them hate him. And kind of their driving goal through this whole campaign was to destroy this guy, right? So I had this encounter where they got into combat with him, but I didn't want him to be defeated. I didn't want him to be killed. I wanted him to escape before they could do that, because I wanted him to live to fight another day, and I still had plans for him, but I wanted them to kind of match blades with him for a bit. So Changeling didn't have a mechanic like this plot twist mechanic, so I had to contrive a way for this to happen, and I had to fight the players tooth and nail to make it happen. So, they've got the guy injured. It's looking like he's getting to the danger zone where they could actually kill him. So I start, using various magics and things to try to get him out of there. And the players were very creative and effective in trying to prevent him from escaping, because they knew that he was going to try to escape because he'd done it to him before. So it was really difficult because I really wanted him to escape. The players really didn't want to. And it's so long ago, I really don't remember if I, quote, cheated to let him escape or if I did it fairly with the dice. But I do remember that when he did escape, the players were not happy. In fact, one of the players was like downright angry and was pissed at me personally. Like outside of the game, the player was pissed at the DM because I had done this, and he felt it wasn't fair. He felt I'd kind of neutered his character and didn't let him do what he should have done. And it was a bad experience. And if I could have had this plot twist mechanic, and I could have said, hey, plot twist, he's going to escape. What do you guys say? You can, say he escapes and you have to face him another day and you get this reward, or you can say, no, we're going to finish him now, and you have to pay this price to do that. And then hopefully, they would have been on board with it, and I could have had him escape, and I wouldn't have had players pissed off. And that's the thing, I've run a lot of Numenera, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've had players refuse GM intrusions. And I've seen people out there say, oh, if your players aren't refusing GM intrusions, then your GM intrusions aren't deadly or nasty enough. Bullshit. I'm sorry, that's bullshit. Maybe that's the way you run your game, and that's fine. You run your game however you want. You play your game however you want. But don't tell people that if they're not doing it that way, they're doing it wrong. That is not what the GM intrusion is for. The GM intrusion is to make the story better. And if you have players who trust you as a GM and they understand that the GM intrusion or the plot twist is there to make the story better, then they should be accepting them all the time. Because they should trust that you're not going to use this to kill their character forever, because that would not be cool, right? That's not what the plot twist is for. It's not a way to kill characters. It's a way to let cool things happen that make the characters' lives more difficult, more interesting, make the story more interesting, maybe bring in some humor now and then, right? With everybody being on board and being okay with it. It's not a way to punish player characters or kill player characters. So don't get stuck in that way of thinking of, oh, no one ever refuses my plot twist, so I must not be doing it right. No, if they're not refusing, you're doing it right. That's what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to be accepting them because it makes the story better for everyone. And I would say if you have players that are refusing more often than not, then either you have a trust issue at your table or you're making your plot twists or your GM intrusions too harsh. Because again, the point is not to punish the players. The point is to make the story better. And if your intrusions are so bad that people are spending XP or spending inspiration all the time to avoid them, then you're kind of missing the point, I think. So again, getting back to my changeling example, the plot twist would have really helped here because again, the players would have had the choice to refuse it. And so if they accept it, then it's like, we chose this, right? And it's a lot easier to swallow something bad when you chose it than when it was forced on you. And again, if the player accepts the plot twist, they get a reward, which again kind of sweetens the taste of that medicine a little bit. And they can turn around and use that inspiration to protect themselves from the fallout of the plot twist if they want to, or they can save it. And the player gets another inspiration point that he can give to yet another player to help them mitigate the plot twist if it's going to affect more than just the one PC. So a great way to use plot twists is as a narrative tool. And I think that's really what these are for, is it's a way to enhance storytelling. So using plot twists, the GM can subtly direct the story, gently and almost imperceptibly influencing events instead of forcing things to happen. The plot twist represents things going bad, right? Or, so bad luck on the part of the PCs, or maybe the bad guys planned really well or were really well prepared for this encounter. Or maybe, luck is on the side of the bad guys for once. So here's an example. I believe I got this from maybe Numenera when it was explaining the GM intrusion, but this is another good example of how to use this kind of mechanic. So let's say the GM plants an interesting adventure seed in a small village, but the PCs don't stay in the village long enough to find that seed. Just outside the village, the PCs run into a vicious, poisonous viper that bites one of them. Okay, the GM then uses a plot twist to say that the poison from the viper is going to seriously mess with this character unless he gets a large dose of a very specific anti-venom, which the group doesn't have. This forces them to go back to the village to get this anti-venom. And then while they're doing that, they can find the adventure seed. Right. So instead of having to put that seed somewhere else, maybe the seed is very tied to a specific NPC and it just doesn't make sense for that NPC to be found somewhere else. And also the GM doesn't have to railroad the players and say, no, you can't leave town yet. Instead, the players get to do what they want to do, but you can use a plot twist to introduce this complication that's going to gently steer them back to the town so they can get that adventure seed. So, some players might even still find the plot twist heavy-handed, right? Even with the choice of refusal and the reward, there's some players out there that'll still, have a problem with that. But even then, getting inspiration will help soften the blow. And they can refuse. So maybe you have a player at your table that just always refuses because they're just one of those players. Well, the system allows for that. And again, the plot twist isn't something to use to railroad the players. It's just a way to give a little nudge here and there. And as a GM, you don't have to have like a goal, like a big picture goal for a plot twist. It could just be something to make things more interesting or more fun or more exciting or more dramatic. So this is very empowering to a GM, not in the haha, now I will destroy your characters kind of way, but in the now I can control the narrative a little bit. I can kind of steer things the way I want to go. I can have some creative control instead of letting the dice have all the control. Also, you can use the plot twist as a way to resolve things in the game. It's a way for you to determine how things happen in the game without just leaving it all to the random dice. So let's say you have the PCs holed up in a room in the dungeon, barricaded in this room, and you've got monsters trying to get in. So you could do it like the 3.5 D&D way and give the door armor class and damage reduction and hit points and have the monsters rolling damage against this door to figure out when they break through or if they break through. Or you could just wait until a dramatically appropriate moment and have them burst through then. And if you want, you can do it as a plot twist and in that way be able to throw the party to inspiration that they can use to get through this maybe difficult encounter. So it's a way for you to base task resolution not just on random dice, but on what works best for the story. And really, this is how a lot of us have done it forever. Even way back in the day, we just sometimes rolled dice behind the screen or pretended to roll dice behind the screen, but we're really just making stuff up to make the story better, right? Well, this just eliminates the charade of having to do that. So this is replacing just rolling dice with good GMing, logic, and smart storytelling. So for example, a PC is climbing a burning rope. Everybody knows it's going to break at some point, but now you have a way to make sure it breaks when you want it to, instead of when the dice want it to. So now, I don't want there to be a quota with this mechanic. That's why I divorced it from XP. But you may want some kind of guideline of, well, how many times should I do this? And it's really up to you. It's really up to your game. The best guideline I could give is just do it when it seems dramatically appropriate. When you have a really good idea, use it, but don't try to force it. But if you want, some kind of ballpark to shoot for, you could use the Numenera thing of trying to give one to each PC every session. But again, that's kind of a quota, which I wouldn't recommend. What I would recommend, though, is kind of have at least a mental idea of how many you've given out to the PCs and who's received them and who hasn't. So there's almost like a rotation. I mean, you don't want it to be an actual rotation because then it's too predictable. But that way everybody's getting the same amount overall. So finally, plot twists should add drama, tension, or complexity to your story. If it's doing that, you're doing it right. So there you go. There's the plot twist. Again, I have this all in the show notes if you want to see it written out. And let me know what you think. So that's going to wrap up episode 96 of Game Master's Journey. If you'd like to reach me, you can email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. I'd love your feedback on this episode. I'd love to hear what you think about the plot twist. And if you start using this, I'd love to hear from you how it goes and how it works, how your players like it, how you like it. Does it lead to any problems or anything? Let me know. GameMastersJourney@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @LexStarwalker. You can follow me on Google plus LexStarwalker. And check out my website, StarwalkerStudios.com. That's where you'll find the show notes. You can find my other podcasts. You can find all kinds of helpful links. Everything's there, StarwalkerStudios.com. So I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on and twist those plots, baby.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.